Okay, so firstly, thank you for inviting us. It's always great to get the opportunity of Mastercard to come to these types of events and to get in front of key players in specific verticals. I'm going to put my hands in the air right away. My kind of area is not specifically verticals. I'm a product person. So what I'll do is I'll talk to you perhaps more generally about one of the kind of key paths that we're going with some of our products. And again, to Amit's point in terms of, really kind of looking at how we can drive the best experience for consumers, because that's key, right? Again, it was already mentioned, there's lots of choice out there when the customer gets to checkout. So it's important that when they get there, they have that opportunity to pick the things to pick those payment methods that are most relevant to them. But what we also want to make sure is that those payment methods, whilst they might drive convenience, we want to also make sure that they are secure. And that also there's a kind of framework there such that, if anything does go wrong, there's always a way to kind of come back and kind of recover things. Okay, so those are kind of some of the key things from a Mastercard perspective. Okay, so I'm John Walls. I work in our acceptance solutions team in Europe. So we're part of the core product organization. My area of focus is more around digital products. And sorry, so I'll just use your arrows instead. Yeah. Okay. So really what I wanted to focus on today is our kind of strategy really for predominantly tokenization, which is really to move e-commerce much more closely aligned to, I guess, some of the things that we've already done in card present, right? So if you look at card present and some of the changes and shifts that we've already seen, where it wasn't so long ago where you would go and you'd present a plastic card with a magnetic stripe on the back. There were all kinds of inherent risks around that, and I won't go into the detail. You can kind of catch me later. We're having a drink, and I'll perhaps tell you a little bit more about that. But we kind of moved away from that. We moved to EMV chips, which straight away drove a lot more security around how you store that payment credential and making sure that it's stored in a much more secure and safe manner. And then we've moved to contactless. Okay. And when you look at now where you are in the kind of physical world, what you've now got is a very convenient way to pay, which is based on a very good base of kind of security. Okay. And what we really want to do is kind of bring up in a similar way e-commerce. Okay. So that when you arrive at checkout in a kind of e-commerce environment, and this is clearly relevant for iGaming as well, to make sure that we're taking some of those same kind of principles and bringing those in to checkout. Okay. So there are three kind of key pillars that we talk about as part of our 2030 strategy. So the first is tokenization of all cards in e-commerce. Okay. And I'll touch on that in terms of what we mean by that, because there are different kind of use cases. When we then move into what we've often referred to as guest checkout, but what we really mean is manual entry. Okay, so where the consumer turns up at checkout, they haven't stored their credential with that merchant, so it means that they need to manually key that card number in. It's not a great experience, right? I know from kind of personal use, often you're then having to go dive out, find your wallet, get your plastic out, key it in. If you get it right first time, fantastic. Particularly on a mobile device, right? If you've got sausage fingers like I have. So how can we improve that? And again, what we're looking at there, and I'll talk about one of the solutions, which is Click to Pay. And then the third pillar really is, so, it's not just about storing credentials. It's not just about providing those credentials. It's also about authenticating the customer, okay? And I imagine most people in the room who certainly are in payments, from a customer authentication perspective, we all have our kind of scars, perhaps from kind of 3DS. Okay, it's not the best experience. So what we're looking at doing is driving biometric authentication. Okay, so moving towards Passkeys. So we've got the tools there. So we're now looking at, built off a platform of tokenization, how can we then create more value to that? And that's one of the other key pillars, how we can improve the authentication. Okay, so just in terms of a level setting, more than anything, so where we talk about network tokens, just to differentiate between a network token versus perhaps a PSP token. I think a lot of merchants are using tokens today, but often what's actually happening is they're storing the credential with perhaps their PSP or payment gateway. And what you end up with is a proprietary token that's on the bottom of the slide between the merchant and their PSP. But what's happening is the PSP is basically switching that out. Once they see the proprietary token, they map it to the credential that they are storing, and then they pass that credential downstream for authorization. What's different with network tokens is we're basically taking that 16-digit card number out of the equation completely. Okay, so instead of the credential being stored within the PSP, the credential itself is stored within the card network. So for Mastercard, we store that and we provide a network token. And then what that means is that when you transact where a network token is available, it means that the actual underlying account number is not within that transaction. Okay, it's actually a token all the way through. And that allows us to make that transaction much more secure. Okay, and I'll touch on again some of the benefits of that. Okay, so that's the kind of principle of network tokens. We then look at that across the main use cases where we see e-commerce transactions happening. Okay, so there are three main ones. So I'll start on the right-hand side, which is device payments. So Apple Pay, Google Pay, etc. Those are already built on our tokenization technology. Okay, so for Mastercard, we have Mastercard Digital Enablement Service, or MDES. So that's our kind of core platform that drives tokenization within Mastercard. So when you do a transaction with Apple or Google Pay, what you're actually doing is you're storing that credential with them and they are tokenizing it with the card network. Okay, so we're kind of good there, right? That space is already happening. So yeah, that gets a big tick in the box. The other two, however, are still kind of work in progress, right? So if we look on the left-hand side, we've got card on file. And what we mean by card on file is where the customer has a relationship with the merchant. They probably register an account and then they store their credential directly with that merchant. Okay. In that instance, again, what we are driving is that merchants now, rather than using that kind of PSP type token model, that instead they push for network tokens, okay, again, to drive more security. The other key thing is, you see on the left-hand side, the security drives better confidence. Okay, so when you present a transaction with a network token to a card issuer, they see that that's a network token, right? And that gives them more confidence about that transaction that's being presented. And the result of that is you see higher approval rates, okay? So again, good reason to kind of do that. And again, that kind of model of storing card information from a customer experience perspective, you get away from that kind of clunky finger keying, and when you go back through, the merchant will just present the information for the card that you've stored, and you can easily make that selection and then carry on through checkout. Okay, so again, it kind of builds for a good experience as well. But the middle one, not all customers want to store their credentials with merchants. Okay, if you keep doing that across multiple merchants, yeah, that in itself, is probably not kind of ideal. And many customers, they are seeing that. So what we see is we still have a lot of customers who are still keying when they get to checkout. Okay, and the way that we address that is with a solution called Click to Pay. Okay, so Click to Pay is a kind of EMVCo initiative. It's based on a kind of standard that's been developed under EMVCo. So in a similar way to chip and pin, to contactless, it's almost a kind of industry initiative to move things on. And that's really what we're doing with Click to Pay. So again, I'll kind of touch on that in a bit more detail as well. Okay, so when we look at iGaming as a vertical, there's a bit of a shift, but it's not huge. So on the left-hand side, if we look at Europe as a whole, what we see is in e-commerce, we're still seeing more than half of transactions are still being done as those kind of guest or manual transactions. And card on file is now round about 44% as a whole across Europe. But then when we look at that from a gaming and gambling perspective, you can see, and it's no surprise, to be honest, I don't think, that it's beginning to weight more towards card on file. Okay. And I guess that's account customers. They have a profile. They want to store their credential to make it easier when they want to make a purchase. Okay. So we're seeing that kind of trend in terms of how checkouts are happening. But then on the right-hand side, I think this is kind of key and quite important, right? So what we've done here is just kind of shown, if I take the two top sections, the 35 and the 22, right? So that's your 57% for card on file. What we're seeing in card on file is 35% of it is using network tokens. And that's good, right? That's beginning to go in the kind of right direction. But there's still 22% that is still that kind of 16-digit card number. And what you'll also see there is the difference in terms of approval rate uplift. So if you can change that 22% and tokenize that, then that will deliver higher approval rates on those transactions. And that's effectively money on the table, right? So if you can improve your approval rates, then that allows you to get more through. And it's similar on the lower half. So again, the two sections being the 43% for guest, and it's a similar thing. So where it's keyed and it's 16-digit card number, it's a lower approval rate. If you convert that into a tokenized transaction, then again, you can get a lift on the approval rate. And that will create more value. Okay, so it's definitely worth kind of investing in and looking to move forward with. Okay, so I'll just kind of touch a little bit more on network tokens for stored cards. So the kind of principle is probably, as I've kind of already kind of described, so the consumer agrees that they want to store their credential to their account with that individual merchant. And then what happens is that merchant takes the credential and then tokenizes that with the card network. Okay. But I talked about the approval rate, but that's not the only benefit that you get. So one of the kind of fundamental elements of tokenizing at network level is the lifecycle management that comes as part of that process, right? If you store a credential yourself as a merchant, or if you have a PSP that does it on your behalf, somebody needs to manage that. Okay. The reality is cards expire, customers change cards, etc., etc. So you've got to find a way to kind of manage that. And there are tools out there, okay, that do help with that. But what network tokens does is it brings that directly into the tokenization service itself. Okay. So if you have a card that's been tokenized with the card network and the issuer implements a change to that card, they reissue, they will automatically update the network and the network will make that change to the credential. Okay. So as long as you are using the token, then essentially the actual account that sits behind it is automatically updated. So you no longer need to worry about it. And that's a huge win for anybody who stores payment credentials. Okay. I talked already about issuer visibility when the transaction is presented. So again, they have more confidence because they know it's a network token. They know it's not been, it's a stolen card. It's been kind of injected into a transaction. So they've got a much higher level of confidence. But what we're not doing is only sending the credential. We're also sending, in many cases, a cryptogram as well, which is a kind of additional layer. So again, it's these things that kind of drive that additional security, drive that additional confidence, and again, allow you to kind of get that uplift on the approval rates. In terms of where we are with it, so network tokens really in the card on file use case has been developing for the last number of years. We're getting good traction. I think we're probably slightly higher than 95% issuer enablement. All we mean by that is the majority of issuers across Europe are fully supportive of network tokens now. There's a couple of kind of edge cases, which is what the delta is. Most of the payment gateways are also supporting network tokens, and those are we're in good strong discussions about enabling those services as well. And again, we've got 47% of card on file transactions are now tokenized. I think we actually tipped 50% in the last couple of months. So again, it's kind of climbing all the time as people see the kind of value of that, and it's actually relatively easy in most cases to implement as well. Okay, and then the final one there, this is an average as a kind of whole. What we often see is a kind of average of 6 percentage points approval uplift, but of course it depends on individual merchants, verticals, etc. So that's network tokens in card on file. So when we then look at, okay, how do we bring network tokens into the guest or that kind of manual entry? This is really where click to pay comes in. And I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with click to pay. What? 3. Perfect. So I know it's more than that because I know there's at least 3 well paid. So we're kind of with click to pay. We're kind of at the beginning of that kind of journey. Okay, so the way that it effectively works is as a consumer, I store my credential, but I store it again with the card network. But it's not just about where I store it and how I store it. It's also about how that's then presented. So if you think when I normally go to a checkout, if I haven't stored my credential, I have to get that bit of plastic, I have to key that in. With click to pay, what you effectively do is you register as a click to pay customer. And then when you get to checkout, if that checkout has been enabled with click to pay, you'll be automatically recognized as a click to pay consumer. Okay. So it's not a kind of, or it shouldn't really be a choice that the customer has to make when they arrive at checkout if they've already enrolled. When you get there, there's basically a decisioning point within the checkout itself that kind of does a lookup in the background, and it will look to see if you have a cookie or a token on your device. Okay. If so, it will take you straight into the click to pay flow. If not, then it falls back and checks your email account to see if there is a click to pay profile against your email account. If that doesn't find a profile, then you go to manual entry. Okay. So you don't have to turn up and say, okay, I want to pay with click to pay. You're paying with card. It's just the fact that if you're registered, you now get a better experience. If you're not yet registered, you go to manual entry. When you go to the manual entry form, you can also enroll. Okay, so it's a very simple, you kind of fill out as normal, and then there's just a simple checkbox underneath, which then creates a profile, creates a token, and then you're a click to pay customer and you transact as such. Next time you go back through a checkout that's been enabled for click to pay, you'll go straight to that kind of experience. Okay. And the experience itself, you can see it there on the screen. So that kind of small kind of red framed piece, I guess typically that would be your manual entry form. What we're doing with click to pay is we're replacing that, and we're actually pulling back the information from the profile and showing the credential so that the customer can make a very simple visual choice. One of the important things to note here as well is, and this is a Mastercard slide, so of course it only has the Mastercard logo, right? But click to pay is a standard. It's an EMVCo initiative, so it's across all of the schemes. So in my click to pay profile, I can have Mastercard cards, Visa, Amex, Discover, Dinos, etc. So all of the main schemes are supporting click to pay. And again, I just select which one by clicking on the radio button. You can see that I get a kind of visual representation of my card. So it's very simple for me to see which card is kind of relevant. And then once I've selected that, I'm not providing any card number or anything that becomes a kind of risk in that transaction. What happens at the back is, for example, you might work with a payment gateway, a PSP, and they will then get an ID from that selection, and they send us that ID, and we then send them back the token that relates to that choice that they've made as they go through Click to Pay. Okay, so again, yeah, it's built on tokens, much better experience for the customer. There's no kind of risk in terms of sharing the account details because that's all at the kind of back end. Yeah, it's a really good experience, and hopefully you'll start to see this more when you get to checkout, right? So we've been working with most of the PSPs, etc., across Europe. It's a global initiative as well, we're in different places in different markets. I live in the UK. Some of the big issuers are already now beginning to push out to their customers to enroll. From an enrollment perspective, you have a choice. You can either enroll at checkout or you can enroll through the issuer app. That we think is probably the more efficient way to do it. So I have a Curve card, for example. I have an app on my phone. I got a notification from Curve. Did I want to enroll into Click to Pay? To which I said yes. So it's straight away, as a consumer, I've got confidence in that, right? Because of course the card is a Curve card. So if Curve invite me to join something like Click to Pay, then of course, that kind of trust mechanism is there already, right? So, okay. And then, again, these are just kind of headline points. Yeah, we probably touched on them. It's simple and secure. It's fast and frictionless, and it's convenient. I think again, the big thing to remember about Click to Pay is, this is effectively an industry play, right? It's EMV code that's driving this with a framework called Secure Remote Commerce. So, everybody is kind of pushing for this. And as I say, all of the leading PSPs, tech partners, are either kind of working and delivering this today, or, they're developing it with a view to be ready. We also have mandates in place with some of our partners, the banking kind of partners particularly, that they should be ready for this next year, April. And, in a position to be, kind of talking to their customers about how they enable their checkouts with this solution. Okay, and then for some of the people that have gone live, we've had like really positive kind of feedback in terms of what they've seen. Again, we talked about approval rates, but things like the reduction in time as you go through checkout, reduction in time, generally means better conversion as well, because the customer is less likely to kind of drop away as they go through that checkout process. And again, for returning users, again, kind of much stronger than they see in comparison to when they turn up at a keyed checkout. So, it's, again, really good experience. Okay, and then that kind of third pillar is Passkeys. And again, I don't know who's familiar with kind of Passkeys, but this is a kind of shift away from using passwords. Passwords are kind of awkward, like trying to remember, which password you've got for which particular thing you're trying to do at any one kind of given time. So generally, there's a move away from using passkeys and instead creating these kind of digital credentials or passkeys as they're referred to. So we're already seeing that happening. Passkeys are unique. They're kind of bound to a domain. So, for example, I think we talk on here, Amazon are pushing it heavily. So instead of needing your email and your password, they're starting to move their customers over so that they're using passkeys instead. And again, some of the other particularly big kind of online businesses are doing similar. So when we look to bring that in as a payments model, again, what we're looking at doing is kind of improving how customers authenticate themselves, right? So 3DS, as I say, it's not always a great experience. Often you're kind of pushed out into a separate kind of window with your card issuer where you do that authentication, and it can be a little bit clunky and a little bit awkward, right? What we're doing with payment passkeys is, again, just trying to kind of streamline that authentication process, and also bring it so it looks more kind of native in the overall kind of checkout. So you haven't got these kind of awkward kind of hop outs while you do certain processes. So in terms of how we do that from a payment perspective, it's very similar to your kind of standard passkey model. There's just a couple of extra things that we do. So you've got that kind of creation of the digital credential itself, which is that kind of first piece. And from a customer authentication perspective, we talk about kind of two-factor. So what that does is that kind of creates that kind of knowledge. So that's your kind of, your biometric becomes your knowledge factor. What we then have is, once you've got your passkey, so you create a Mastercard passkey, what you then do is you link your cards to that passkey. Okay. And when you link a card, the first time you do that, you still go through your traditional customer authentication, right? So there is a kind of ID process, ID verification process that happens. But then once that's happened, that has then made that link, right? So that card is now linked to that passkey. So again, the next time you go through a checkout where you've got kind of, because this is all built on tokens, right? So it's applicable for card on file, it's applicable for click to pay. So they will then be able to use biometrics to authenticate that customer rather than a separate kick out into 3DS. Okay. And again, in a similar way to when I talked about tokens earlier, there are some additional things that we have around things like cryptograms that, again, just allow us to kind of provide a different level of confidence again, because the technology has kind of moved on. Okay, so I'll hopefully kind of just bring that together now in terms of, okay, what does it look like, right? So, so on the left-hand side, I don't know if you can kind of see this okay. So this is really how we kind of see the card on file journey. So this is where, as a consumer, I've stored my credential with an individual merchant. So you'll see there, I get to check out. My card is already stored. So the merchant presents that card to me. I then select that, go to pay, confirm, and now, again, using passkeys, I get a much more kind of intuitive and native authentication process that's happening within the flow. So I just use my biometrics to do that authentication. That confirms, and then the transaction completes. Okay. So it's a very kind of simple flow, right? And that's really where we want to be. We want to make it much easier for the customer. So that, again, it's a choice that they're happy to make. It's a convenient way to pay. When we then take that into click to pay, again, in place of that kind of manual entry. Okay, so we get to check out. And here you'll see at this point, it's just doing a lookup in the background to see if the customer has a click to pay profile, and it finds they have, right? So we don't get that manual entry anymore. We get my card list. I select which card I want to use. Okay, I confirm. And again, I just do a biometric authentication straight away. And my order's complete. Okay, so again, it's just making it much simpler across both models. And you'll notice there that both models, when we looked at the three earlier, we had the third one, which was device payments. It's kind of bringing it more aligned to that. Okay. So you've got that kind of biometric authentication with Apple Pay, with Google Pay. And what this is doing is it's bringing it into a kind of device agnostic approach. So yeah. Okay. And then I guess kind of final slide. So why is all this important, right? It's important because e-commerce is an important area across verticals, but clearly within iGaming, it's how consumers are transacting, right? Now, more generally, we're seeing huge growth in digital commerce. So you can see there, forecast 13%, and that's kind of continuing. All right, so we've got to make sure that we get this right. What we're also seeing is a big shift towards more and more towards mobile payments, right? And if you think what you've got on desktop from an e-com perspective can be a little bit awkward. when you then bring that down into a much smaller device, then it just can become even less effective, right? So again, we've got to make sure that going forward, we've got the right experience for the customer. Okay, so again, that's really where we have our kind of 2030, right? So that's our kind of 100% network tokenization. So no exchanging of 16-digit card number anymore, right? Everything will be tokenized. The things we need to do to get there, clearly, right? So working with everybody in the room, technical partners, merchants, etc. It's important that jointly we can kind of get to that space, because it's in everybody's interest, right? And then I guess the final one, and this one might be for kind of debate later, but there's lots of buzz at the moment about agentic commerce. So how does AI play through in all of this? What does that look like? And we're doing a lot of work within the industry, but within Mastercard, around how do we make sure that, again, we can kind of build a framework such that when an agent makes a transaction, do we know who the agent is, right? Do we trust the agent? So making sure that these things are certified, they are known parties when they go to shop at a merchant, and again things like using tokens and very specific types of tokens when it comes to agentic commerce. Things like customer intent. So there will come a point where I'll be able to say to an agent, okay, I want to book a holiday south of France. You go find me. I'll tell you the conditions, but I'll kind of leave it to the agent, right? And they'll go and find the right party, and they'll kind of make that transaction at the appropriate point. We're doing a lot around, how do you actually evidence things like the customer intent, so that, post-event, if there is a query with that transaction, how do you actually show, what did the customer ask for versus what did the agent actually do? So, it's kind of putting frameworks in place to make sure that, again, these things are done in a way that, firstly, they're convenient, but again, they have to be secure, and they have to have ways that, you can kind of go back and look. And if you need to make corrections, you've got kind of almost an evidence path to be able to do those things. So those are the kind of things that we kind of particularly are looking at. Okay, and then just to kind of finish off, for I guess kind of call to action type thing, as you kind of look at, okay, well, what does that mean for my business, and how do I kind of move things forward around tokenization and that kind of 2030 vision. I would say probably start on the right side. So look at the partners that you work with. People like Paysecure. We are in deep conversation with Paysecure around these things. I know that you're keen to also to look forward at these. So look to leverage that where you can, but also please come talk to us, and we can also kind of help you and give you guidance as well. So